Well, a very good morning to you, Mr. Benjamin Williams. Today, students, I'm so fortunate and we are so privileged to have Ben's time. He is the CEO and Secretary General of Singapore Red Cross. He's been with the Singapore Red Cross since 2012. And he called himself an accidental humanitarian. So I read in his profile, and Mr. Ben has got a very long and illustrated career in diplomacy. So we are very excited to have him on board and to tell us a little bit about Singapore Red Cross. So Ben, if you're okay with me starting the interview questions, I'll proceed. So very good to have you here. So if you could give us a quick background of Singapore Red Cross and the mission and vision of your organization, and maybe also talk about where your organization is situated within in terms of the industry.
Okay. Thank you very much, Sandy, for having me on this show or this interview. I'm glad to be contributing to the knowledge about the Red Cross and the movement. Perhaps I can give you a quick background of the Singapore Red Cross. The Singapore Red Cross is part of a global movement called the Red Cross or Red Crescent movement. The Red Cross and the Red Crescent are part of the same movement. They are not different movements. So it is an organization that is an offshoot of the Geneva Convention, of which most countries are party to. So in a sense, while many people think of the Red Cross as a non-governmental organization or NGO, the Red Cross is not actually an NGO, but neither are we the government. So we are in a very unique position in the whole spectrum of organizations, global organizations. So that's the first thing. We are part of the movement of the Red Cross, Red Crescent globally. But it is a very unique organization in the sense that each national society, the Singapore Red Cross or the Australian Red Cross or the Malaysian Red Crescent, we are all independent organizations. So each one of us have our own constitution, have our own governance. The best way to understand the Red Cross movement is that we are all members of the movement or the federation in the same way that independent countries are members of the UN. So we are members of this organization, but we are not branches of the organization, right? So we have our own governance and our own priorities. So what binds us together? Okay, we call the 7 fundamental principles and all that, but I think for the layman, the best way to understand the Red Cross, Red Crescent movement's overall motivation is that we are there for the most vulnerable. The Red Cross movement came out of a need to take care of the non-combatants, the wounded civilians, the wounded combatants in time of war and conflict. Because prior to the Red Cross movement, an injured person lays in the battlefield. Neither party can intervene to help him or her because the firing is still going on. The formation of the Red Cross meant that there was a neutral body recognized by most countries, almost every country in the world, that can intervene to help injured combatants, no longer combatants, civilians that are caught in conflict. But over time, we have evolved, and now the Red Cross or Red Crescent movement exists for the most vulnerable, not only during conflict, but during disasters and development. So each national society, like the Singapore Red Cross, will have its own priorities. In many countries, the Red Cross or Red Crescent is very involved in disaster response because there are disasters in the country. In Singapore, fortunately, we don't have disasters, so we have to ask ourselves, who are the most vulnerable in Singapore? So overall, our motivation is to relieve human suffering, to protect human lives and dignity. So in that context, we have decided that the most vulnerable in Singapore are the elderly, the seniors, and the disabled. So a lot of our programs are focused on the elderly, the disabled, and disadvantaged families in Singapore. We fall within the industry sector of the social service. So while we are not a government body, neither are we an NGO, we are part of this whole sector of social service. So bottom line, we are there for the most vulnerable. In Singapore, our primary focus is on the elderly, the disabled, and disadvantaged families.
I like that. That is such a comprehensive background. I love how you weave the origin, and further informs your current mission and vision. So that's really, really thorough. Thank you for that. And if I can move on to the next question, just wondering about the wider macro environment. What is, like, for example, policy, political, economic, social, cultural, technology like AI, environmental and legal factors, have any of those factors, impacted Singapore Red Cross? You don't have to address all of that, say, for example, technology or social, cultural, political factors. And if there are those factors that have affected Singapore Red Cross daily operations, how have they done so?
So like the Singapore Red Cross, like I suppose most other organizations, cannot exist in a vacuum. We are always affected by the business, the social environment. Having said that, the Singapore Red Cross is part of the social service sector. All the more we are, affected, and our programs have to evolve with the social environment that we live in. Over the last few years, I think there are a number of factors that have impacted the social service sector, and in particular Singapore Red Cross. COVID-19 revealed a lot of things about the social fabric of the country. So one of the big areas that has affected Singapore Red Cross is the obvious gaps that exist within the social fabric in Singapore. Singapore is an affluent country, and often a casual visitor will think that there's no poverty in Singapore. But poverty is hidden in Singapore, right? So, our one-room flats, for example, are together with more affluent housing, so you don't really see it until we move in. But what COVID did was it revealed some of the weaknesses and more families needing support, while members, breadwinners, having lost their jobs and all that. So we found that our support for disadvantaged families have grown significantly. A lot of them we hope are transitional, and as they get back on their feet, we can move out of it. But the other thing that in a sense, the pandemic revealed was that just below the surface of calm and security, there was this growing need for mental well-being. And it revealed a lot of gaps in the mental health environment in Singapore, whether it's among the youth, whether it's among the seniors who live alone, whether it's among the disadvantaged families. So how has it affected Singapore Red Cross? One of our strategy that we have adopted since the last 75 years of existence has been building resilience in Singapore. And building resilience in Singapore has mostly meant like first aid, crisis preparedness, and all that. But now more and more, we realize that mental well-being, psychosocial support is a key element of building resilience. So this has become an important part of Singapore's Red Cross offerings: mental well-being, psychosocial support, psychological first aid, and this will be a growing element of what Singapore Red Cross has to offer. So that's the second factor. The third factor that I would say has significantly impacted Singapore is the aging population. it is a global phenomenon in many of the developed countries. But in Singapore, particularly so, we are very rapidly moving to a super aged population. Some statistics even put us overtaking Japan as the oldest country in the world. So 1 in 4 Singaporeans will be above the age of 65. So that has had a tremendous impact on some of our programs. I spoke about the lonely or seniors, those who live alone. So out of the 25% or so, many of them now live alone because their children have moved overseas, in this global environment, or their wives have, or their partners have passed away, so they live alone. So we have had to increase many of our programs that take care of seniors, especially lonely seniors. This includes 24-hour home monitoring, medical chaperone to take them to their health appointments and things like that. So that's one aspect of it. But we realize that it has also affected our other programs. And one major impact is our blood program. We are the national blood donor recruiter. The KPI for the blood stock in Singapore, in a sense, is the responsibility of Singapore Red Cross, right? We have to bring in the blood donors. We don't run the blood bank, but we have to bring in the blood donors. And the aging population means rapidly many donors fall off the donation list because they are unable to donate. And at the same time, the blood needs increase. And the other side of the coin is our youth population continues to decrease because we have one of the lowest population growth rates in the world. One, where 2.1 is the replacement. So this has impacted our blood program, and a lot of our emphasis and resources over the next 2-3 years will go towards building a more robust environment in our blood program, reaching out to the young people, the youth. I mean, there are many other factors, but one last factor I would say is in this whole world of IT, and AI. I put it all together. In a sense, we now have to really take this on board because we need to be able to multiply our resources, right? And IT and AI are one means to do so. Otherwise, you get left behind. But I mean, I can say much more about it, but I think that suffices. But the thing I want to mention is that the flip side of it, with IT comes a lot of also dangers, privacy, PDPA, and while even companies, corporates with huge resources get their database hacked and all that. So now charities like Singapore Red Cross inevitably have to spend resources to protect their data. And this is an additional cost to us. And we who work in the charity sector, of course, sometimes are not as sensitive about some of these things. So now we have to sensitize all our staff and our volunteers on data protection and things like that. So I think this is another big area. The final area, of course, is climate change and how we need to adapt our programs to be much more aware of being green, of being climate resilient. And this is both our local programs as well as our overseas disaster response programs. So I think these are some of the factors. Yeah, sorry it took too long.
No, that's really, I love all your responses because they're so comprehensive, and it's almost like we're sinking in our minds, because I'm like, oh, I wonder if you talk about AI, and you did, it's like, it's wonderful. I guess we can both agree, just hearing from you, that the macro environment, as you say, no business exists in a vacuum. It can definitely affect the operations of Singapore Red Cross. And just, I think in your conversation, you also touch on some of the immediate environment, how it affects you, like, the social cultural effect. And what about, I was just wondering if there are any other competitive pressures. I know you mentioned earlier in the conversation that not government, not NGO, this, so you're part of the big, like the neutral ground, like Swiss, if I could use that word. But is there any immediate pressures in your immediate environment that you're concerned or acutely aware of?
Okay. Okay. So first of all, I want to add that the Singapore Red Cross, one of our key strategies is to build a coalition to respond to whatever challenges that we are facing, whether it's overseas disaster response, taking care of the elderly, the families, right? We actually believe in this idea of a 1 billion coalition. The premise of this is that the social challenges facing us today in the world are so great that no one organization, even an organization as big as the Red Cross, Red Crescent movement, or even the UN can deal with it. So we need to bring partners on board. And for me, which I've been emphasizing in Singapore Red Cross, is that partnership is not just about other humanitarian organizations. That is one. So we should look at other humanitarian organizations as our partners, not as our competitors, right? So we should bring them on board and see where we can work together, not be competitors, but as supplementing each other's work, complementing each other's work. But the thing that we need to build strong partnerships with is with the private sector. And here, I mean, real partnerships, not just see the private sector as a source of donations, which we normally do. But I give you one example, and I think this is one of the big challenges in the humanitarian sector, including Singapore Red Cross: innovation. The humanitarian sector is way behind the rest of the private sector in terms of innovation. What we have been doing 50 years ago, generally we are still doing. With a bit of changes here and there. We spend billions of dollars, trillions of dollars on investment and in innovation in the private sector, including in the arms industry and all that. But we spend minuscule in investment and innovation in the humanitarian sector. So I feel that we need to really bring on board our partnership with the private sector, but see them as partners, not donors only. And one big area where I think we need to really spend effort to build is in innovation, because some of these innovations can then also mean advantages for the private sector. You can still make a profit out of it in other areas, but it also will benefit the social sector. So I think whether, for example, after a disaster, most humanitarian organizations leave a disastrous footprint, in terms of like plastic cans and, discarding. We can do much more to improve that. Water and sanitation. A lot of our water and sanitation innovations are way behind. I mean, we can do much more in terms of bringing proper water and sanitation. So we need to. So I think innovation is one big area, yeah. And in this same realm, how can we leverage AI? Again, I think we are behind the curve. The private sector has moved on very quickly in adopting AI for a lot of their processes. I think we can learn from that. So I think these are some of the challenges that are challenging the humanitarian sector, but the humanitarian sector is very slow to shift the ship around, and often we are like very comfortable doing what we have been doing all the time. So I think this is one of the big challenges.
Thank you so much for being so transparent. And I think it's from the learnings and identifying the challenges that, I think you identified two key points, technology, AI, cybersecurity, and investment in that space will benefit Singapore Red Cross, and also research and development sounds like, R&D. But I think those are really yeah, I'm just really appreciative of your honest, insights, and thank you so much. I know we've gone over time a little bit, but we are deeply appreciative of your contribution to this course, Mr. Ben.
Thank you
Thank
very
you
much.
so much. See you. Goodbye.
Bye.